and then a supper. That'll be great. Yeah, it's really nice. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll leave this on the table, probably in the front here. If you want to sign them up, have them over for supper, by all means. Without any further ado, you can introduce yourself.
Sure.
But let's begin with prayer and commit our quarter to the Lord. Our gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you again for your goodness to us and faithfulness, Lord, that never changes. You are the same yesterday, today, and forever. The Scriptures tell us about you, Lord. We have experienced that. That's who you are. We thank you for bringing Arnie and his grandson here safely, and we anticipate, Lord, to have a blessed time of fellowship and communion, but also to be under the word and to be taught of those things in the Scriptures that you want to tell us about and you want to remind us, and things that are very important for us in our faith, in our walk, and in our witness to others. And so, Lord, we just thank you for each one that has come tonight, and ask that you would reserve a special blessing for everyone. For those that aren't here, Lord, that would love to be, maybe they'll be listening online, and may you bless them as well wherever they are. We pray this with thanksgiving in Jesus' name.
Amen.
The default course is not a set fee. We do by donation. Many of you have them here before. We suggest $30 per person for the week. And so I'll be setting up a donation box, and if the Lord want to support the expenses for the school and the teacher, by all means do that throughout the week.
Okay. Okay. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to study the book of Isaiah from the point of view that a prophet is a person called by God to call the nation of Israel back to proper covenant living. Okay? God made a covenant with his people at Mount Sinai. And the angels are the mediators of that covenant, according to the Scriptures, both Old and New Testament. However, God also gave prophets, and the prophets were raised up to remind the people of what the covenant promises were, what the obligations were, and how God was seeing their progress or regress on the issue of, have they kept their word that they promised? We will do everything the Lord says. That was the promise they gave God at Mount Sinai. And so we're going to study the prophets from the prophet Isaiah from the point of view of that the prophet's main goal is to call Israel to be faithful to what they promised at Mount Sinai and to show faith in the covenant God gave. Now, to do that, it is very helpful to gain a sense of what are those fundamental things that are taught about the covenant, about who God is. Otherwise, you don't know what he needs to address. Now, the easiest thing is to perhaps go to the Ten Commandments. But actually, if you want to understand the God of the covenant, you have to understand Genesis thoroughly. Okay? You have to understand Genesis thoroughly. And once you understand Genesis thoroughly, then the rest of the Torah makes sense, and it will help you understand, what are you looking for in Isaiah? What are you looking for? Because God actually sets out a plan of how he's going to do it. Okay? The simplest way to do it is to recognize that the first 5 books, which is called the Torah, or the book of Moses, okay? The first book is Genesis, and it's the beginning of all these things. And it's in Genesis that you really get introduced to God, okay? By the time you have read the story of Joseph, you have a lot of questions that you would want the reader to think about based on having read those 50 chapters. Okay? Now, here are some questions. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 12 questions. I'm going to show you where they come from. And then we're going to go through Isaiah and see how Isaiah also is using these questions as fundamental to assess the people. Okay? The questions aren't Arnie's. The questions come from simply a close observation of what the text is doing. Okay? Okay? Like when your dad evaluates you, most of you know your dad's well enough to know what are the first 5 questions he might ask you if he's been away for a month. It's like, okay. Those questions will show his values and what he's hoping from you. Because he's not going to talk about something that doesn't matter to him. He's going to ask some, did you feed the cows? If that was your job or whatever. Did you treat your younger brother well? Okay? So what I'm going to do is 2 things. One is to lay down kind of who is God, and is this the God you're willing to follow? And then 2, study Isaiah through that grid. How's Israel doing? And are those questions valid in Isaiah's day? Hundreds of years after Moses. And are they valid today? And what did they have to do with Jesus? How does he give us understanding on these questions? The first question is this, that God would ask Israel, is, do you believe that God and God alone made the heavens and the earth? Fundamental question. Do you believe God and God alone made the heavens and the earth? Which implies, do you believe that God is all-powerful? Because Genesis begins with, in the beginning in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. That's how it starts. Boom. So the first thing he introduced himself as, I am the creator of the heavens and the earth. When Jonah's asked, who are you? I'm a Hebrew. And I'm a servant of the God who made heaven and earth, the dry ground, right? The sea and the dry ground. He is getting his identity from the very first few verses of the book of Genesis. That's what a Hebrew is, versus all the pagans. All the sailors in the boat, if you asked, who is God? And they'd say, which God? Well, what God do you follow, Jonah? Well, we would know if we knew your occupation, if we knew what land you came from. And Jonah then says, actually, I am a servant of the God who made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and the dry ground. So if one of the first questions is, who do you believe God is as far as creation? It's a very fundamental question. You would not make idols if you got this question right. And in Isaiah's day, the land is absolutely filled with idols. They don't trust God to be there for them, and so they make idols. Okay? So one of the first questions that God wants to know is, do you believe God made the heavens and the earth? Second question. Are you willing to follow a God who decides what's good, what's very good, and what's not good? Now, these 2 questions so far have nothing to do with the fall of man. These would be things that Adam would have to know. Adam would know that God created the heavens and the earth and everything in them. And 2, he was told what God thought of things, and he has to decide, does God get to decide what is good? And as you know, every time he did something in a day, he saw that it was good. Now, he never says it. He comments with his eyes. That's the point. Because when God says something, it's always a command, which shows his tremendous power. Okay? He comes across as someone who, when he speaks, it happens. But when he wants to comment, he looks with his eyes, and he saw that it was good. Does God decide, by what he sees, what he looks on, does God get the final say on what is good? That's a day's work. What is very good? That was a week's work. And what is not good? That's man without woman made yet. God deciding what's not good is not necessarily evil. Man without a woman is not evil, but it's not good. And so the word good implies done. It's done. Because does God decide what is good? Or Israel, do you decide what is good? And this is going to be a fundamental problem with Israel. It goes all the way back to the Judges. And every man did what was, help me out? The Hebrew word is good. It's always translated right, but it's good. Because they think they've got the hand on what is good. And God said, that was Israel's first mistake. You are deciding what is good in your own eyes. You look around and you think you can determine what is good, very good, and not good. That's the Lord's prerogative. And so God decides what's good. God decides what is very good, and God decides what's not good. Okay? So those are three questions right off the bat. And you'll see that Isaiah is going to be very upset with his people. They do not treat God as if he is the creator of the heavens and the earth. One. They do not treat God as someone who has tremendous power. They're always looking for more power. The second main question is they do not trust God to decide in their lives what is good. Okay? And as we go through Isaiah, this will become so clear. So clear. Okay? Third question is, God decides who lives and who dies. Not you. Not me. God does. And God says, anyone who eats of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil will die. God decides who lives and who dies. He doesn't ask people's opinion ahead of time. He has the power of life and death. And whether you live or you die, that's God's prerogative. And if he puts a condition on it, he can put a condition on it. But he decides who lives and who dies. Another way of putting it in the Torah is he decides who gets mercy and whom he hardens. Who he spares and who he drowns. Who he lets up from being bound to replaced with a ram, and who he doesn't let go of. God decides who lives and who dies. Okay? He has that power. Another fundamental issue concerning God is that he is spirit. He is spirit. Are you willing to follow a God that you cannot see? Boy, that's fundamental for Israel. In fact, when Moses went up there and they came to conclusion after 40 days and 40 nights that he had died, it says they made a calf god because they didn't know what happened to Moses. They couldn't follow a God they could not see if they didn't have Moses whom they could see. They built the calf god because they would not follow a God they could not see when they no longer had Moses. God was very upset about this because it gave the impression they put more of the credit for the salvation on Moses than on God himself. And that's why when Moses came up there, he says, I'm going to destroy the people that you brought out. And he said, I didn't bring them out, you brought them out. And they have an argument about who brought them out. Because God knew, you built the calf god. These people built the calf god because they believe you brought them out. They're messed up. They will not follow a God that they cannot see. All they have to do is hide you for 40 days, 40 nights, and they'll go berserk. Okay? So, that's another question. Fundamental question. Are you willing to follow a God that you cannot see? Israel fails miserably. That's why they want to build Idols. Okay? Am I tapping this or what's going on? Okay, good. Some more questions. Do you believe that God and God alone has the power to create, to do anything, build the heavens and the earth? Do you believe that God is a God that you cannot see, but he's there? God doesn't want to hear words like, where is God? Where's God? There's no water. Where's God? And God's like, I can be present even though you cannot see me. You have to take it by faith. Who decides what's good, not good? Is it good to go out in the wilderness for 3 days journey? By the third day, it's a death march. You'll never get out unless God helps you. To walk 3 days journey into the wilderness means it's a death march. By the third day, you are going to take 3 days to get back. Are you following me? You won't last that long. And a lot of people, no doubt, would have huge trouble with that. And God decides that's not just good, it's very good. And you're like, we're not sure if this is good. And the first time they get thirsty, they go crazy. This is a terrible idea. This is not good. And they come after Moses and they want to stone him. Because they do not agree with God, that God has the final say on what is good, what is very good, what is not good. Okay? So Isaiah is going to talk about that too. Another one. Let's go now. We haven't dealt with anything to do with the fall. Are you following me? Like God warned Adam that he has the power of life and death before he had done anything wrong, correct? God's assessment, everything was good, was before Adam did anything wrong. God shows himself in the scriptures before Adam has done anything wrong, that he is truly the creator of the heavens and the earth. It has nothing to do with man's sin. But here's some questions that have to do with the temptation and the fall, showing the serpent's strategy. Are you okay? Are you willing to follow a God who keeps secrets? Who keeps secrets. And you're going to see there's some major secrets kept in the book of Isaiah. But God kept a secret because the serpent knew that on the day that man and woman would eat the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, they would become like God, knowing both good and evil. And God knew that. And God confirmed that that was true. But God had not told that to Adam and Eve. Because God does not owe you everything he knows. He can tell things to the angels he doesn't tell us. And if the angels hear it, even other beings know it. But he doesn't have to tell it to us. Your faith is not based on what he's told heaven, but what he's told you. But the serpent knows that he knows this truth, and that God has kept this secret. And it is true. God later on tests, it is true. Man now has the knowledge of, man is like one of us, knowing both good and evil. So the question is, are you willing to follow a God who doesn't tell you everything? But what he does tell you is true, but he doesn't tell you everything. He can hide things from you for his own purposes. Okay? And so we're going to look at that issue. The serpent uses that to cause trouble, causes doubt in the woman, and it makes God kind of look bad. Because we tend to not keep secrets from our spouses or from our close friends, not very many. And the serpent is trying to give the impression that you can't trust God because he has a different reason why he doesn't want you to eat the fruit. It has nothing to do with you'll die. It has to do with you'll be like him, knowing good and evil. So he's really kind of not on your side. So again, are you willing to follow a God who keeps secrets? This will be a big one in Isaiah as you move forward. Okay? Another fundamental question in Book 1 of Genesis, which is chapter 2-4, all the way to the end of chapter 4, is Are you okay that God is going to bring salvation through hatred? Because God talks to the serpent and he says, I'm going to put hatred between you and your seed and the seed of the woman. You showed up in friendship. You showed up like an angel of light. And you convinced the woman that I wasn't worth trusting through your friendship, through your insight, through your willingness to help. You clearly were a liar because you lied. You said that she would not die. You are a liar. And 2, you were a murderer because you did it because you wanted them both dead. And that's why Jesus is. The serpent or the devil has been a murderer and a liar from the very garden where mankind was taken down. That was lying lips, and that was murderous thoughts. But you didn't show up like a typical murderer and a liar, but as a friend, as a counselor, as a guide, simply wanting you to get what is the best. So you used friendship to murder and destroy and to steal. I will use hatred to crush you and save the seed of the woman. I will put the hatred there. Certainly you wouldn't. This friendship between the seed of the woman and the serpent, God says, I am fully committed to making sure that is utterly destroyed. To save the seed of the woman and destroy the serpent. Now that seems harsh, but that's absolutely fundamental to how God redeems. He redeems through hatred. Think about it. Did Jesus end on the cross because people loved him or hated him? Absolutely. Why were the prophets effective? Because so often they were hated without cause. So you knew what they're saying was real, was true, because they'd be willing to die for what they believed. Are you willing to follow a God who increases pain? When he talked to the woman, he said he's going to increase the pain of the woman in childbirth, and he's going to increase the pain of the man working in the fields. Salvation is going to come through pain. Increased pain. And that is a major theme as you go through your Bible. It will come through pain. Okay? It pained God's heart when Adam did something that God considers quite hateful, quite violent. And God says, I'm going to pain your hands and your feet. You can walk in stubble and among thistles and thorns and by the sweat of your brow. And women, you will increase in your pain in your childbirth because you pained the Lord. That's what you did. But I'm going to use this pain to bring salvation to those who love God. Okay? And that pain will be his method. When God talked to Cain, he said, sin is crouching at the door, meaning now that Adam did wrong, okay, Adam did wrong. Clearly God expected obedience. I mean, you can make that one of your questions if you want. Are you willing to follow a God who expects obedience? But we're going to get it with what I'm just going to say right now, which is a little stronger than obedience. It's a little different. It's this. When Adam did wrong, sin came into the world, correct? Through one man's disobedience, sin came into the world, correct? Well, the first time you know of the fact that sin's in the world is when God talked to Cain. And he says to Cain, when he's depressed and he's angry, he's full of spit and vinegar, he's thinking of doing something wrong. God knows it. So he talks to him, and he says, if you do well, will it not go well with you? If you do well, I'll lift you up. Your countenance down, but I'll accept you. If you do well, you will feel better, and I will accept you. But be warned. Sin is crouching at the door. It's at the entrance of your house. It's God's way of saying, sin is now in the world. And are you willing to follow a God who demands that you rule over it? Because if you don't, it will rule over you. And that's a fundamental question of the Torah. Do you believe that God has a right to tell you, rule over sin? Rule over it. Do not let it rule over you. Cain does not heed God's word, and what does he do? He kills his brother. Now some guys say, well, he hasn't got much choice because he's a sinner. That's ridiculous. You can hate someone, but you don't have to go and kill him. You could realize this is so wrong and choose not to kill and realize, okay, I messed up. God gave me a warning. Now, God didn't tell him, don't kill your brother, because the text wants to make it very clear. God's not the one who brought up murder. He didn't say, don't murder, because the text is making it very clear. He came up with murder all by him because he has now the knowledge of good and evil. But God did warn him that whatever you're doing, sin is crouching at the door, and it desires to have you. It wants to rule over you, but you must rule over it. And we have to ask ourselves as we go through Isaiah, does Isaiah the prophet expect Israel to rule over sin or to have sin rule over them? And sin completely rules over the entire nation. It becomes a mess. God says, Yahweh is slandered all day long among the nations because of you. The nations look into your behavior and they cannot speak well of me. That proves that sin ruled over them and they did not rule over sin. Now some people have this idea that through concept of total depravity, you cannot rule over sin. It's a misunderstanding what he means. He's not talking about sinlessness. He's talking about, are you going to allow sin to have full way in your life so you become a murderer, a liar, an adulterer? Or are you going to say, that's wrong? Are you going to be a Joseph? Or are you going to be a Cain? That's a choice you make. And Isaiah makes it very clear, his nation has chosen the wrong path, with few exceptions. Okay? Are you with me, guys? These are fundamental questions. Another question God would want as you go through the Torah is, so the question is this, are you willing to follow a God who expects you to rule over sin and not have it rule over you? A lot of young people want to love Jesus, but they don't want to give up their sin. They want Jesus and their sin. They do not want to give up their sin. Or they'll say, I'll give up my sin when I get married. And God says, that is just so convenient. You sow your wild oats, and then you'll get married. That is, from God's point of view, ridiculous. It's just utter nonsense. The attitude should be, for anyone who says they love Jesus, that they no longer want to be ruled by sin, but be ruled by Christ. That's how we rule over sin. If you continue, another fundamental question is, as you move through the Torah, you know, we're still in chapter 3 and 4. Do you know that? Like, we haven't gotten anywhere in the Torah because it's virtually every important question of what Israel has to get right with God is in the first of the 11 sections of Genesis. You see, there's a prologue and there's 11 sections. The first section is the fall of man, Adam, and the fall of man, Cain. First with God and then with fellow man. The first one deals with you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. If they would have done that, it wouldn't have happened. Second one is love your brother as yourself. Would have done that? Wouldn't have happened. So the two greatest commandments are based on the first section of the book of Genesis. And so do not be surprised as you study Isaiah. He is going to my master said no to. Well, Adam did. Are you following me? And Adam brought, through man's disobedience, he brought death into the world. But through one man's obedience, Joseph, he brought salvation and preservation of life to many. At the end of his life, the boys thought Joseph was going to kill them all when Dad died. And the thought was, what happens if he has a grudge? Like Cain. And Joseph, he had more reason to hate his brothers than Cain ever did, to hate his brother. And he chose not to. He said, you intended it for evil. Yeah, you're hateful. And that's how God sent me down here. But God used your hatred, your evil intent, for the salvation of many. Am I in the place of God that I should do such a thing? No. Adam disobeyed God, so become like God. He gained the knowledge of how to do right and wrong, in the sense of how to harm. His son kills his brother. Joseph has this knowledge of good and evil. He has the power to do it. He is on the throne of Egypt. But he knows, just because I have the knowledge of good and evil and the power to do it doesn't mean I can do it. And he says, I'm not God, even if I have the knowledge of good and evil. And he tells his brothers that he will not harm them. He loved his brothers as himself. He loved God with all his heart, soul, strength, and mind, and he loved his brothers as him. He fulfilled the law before the law was even given. And so if someone says, well, the law is impossible to keep. Who can love God with all his heart? Who can love his neighbor as himself? God said, Joseph did. You're without excuse. He had 1,000 reasons to hate his brothers, but he loved me with all his heart. And therefore, sin did not rule over him. And he was the product of the Abrahamic covenant. I said, through your seed, Abraham, all nations will be blessed. And Joseph is the son of Jacob, who's the son of Isaac, and Isaac is the son of Father Abraham. So God used hatred and pain and suffering, and God decides who lives and who dies, and all these things, and he works it out. Okay? Another one we need to understand the book of Isaiah, it's very important. 2 more questions. One is, are you willing to trust God in the prophetic word? God has a prophetic word. And it matters more what he has said than anything you could conjure up as reasonable. It doesn't matter what you think he should do. It's what has he said. And that's a fundamental question Israel has to understand. What has God said? And so, Israel, what has God said? You act as if he has said nothing. You have forgotten everything that he has said. He has given you his prophetic word. He says, if you do this, this is what will happen to you. If you do this, this is what. He's told you. What has he said? The prophetic word is everything. And secondly, the prophetic word, and this sounds strange, but God makes it very clear. The serpent came and used the weaker vessel to bring down man. God is going to use the weaker vessel through childbirth to destroy the devil. Let me put it another way. God is going to bring salvation through the woman. That is a major motif. Through the woman. Salvation will come through the woman. And through the woman and through deception. And through pain. And through almost a sense of, if God doesn't show up, we're so dead. You see, when Eve is promised that God will use her seed and her to defeat the devil, that God's going to do this, she's already as good as dead, because God said, on the day you eat of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, you will most surely. She's a dead woman. She's only living by grace. But she is now dead. And she can prove it because she's wearing clothing that is a symbol of death. For by the wages of sin is death. The devil said, you won't die. You did die. And you are dead. You look like death. You smell like death. And those animals will turn to dust, and so will you. So you did die, you are dead, and you will die. Wear it. It's who you are. And God promised that God would bring salvation through the woman who's as good as dead. I'll give you a simple one for the church. The church is a woman, correct? God brings salvation when the church picks up its cross. If you pick up your cross, what are you? You're as good as dead. And that's the power of the church. And the church is a woman that is as good as dead by choice. We consider ourselves dead to this world and alive to God. So let me go through it as we go through Isaiah, okay? Because what I want to understand is the people who are reading Isaiah, the Hebrew people reading it, they're reading Isaiah through the Torah. Are you following me? They have all those scrolls. They know it so well, and they know what he is doinking them with. It's like, don't you believe the scriptures? That would be kind of, what's wrong with you guys? And the Torah is not just the 10 Commandments. Because the fact is, long before you get the 10 Commandments, God has really revealed, who is he? What does he want from you? And how did it go south? And who's going to fix it? So you're going to want to read Isaiah through all of these questions again and again and again. And you'll see similarities in the Torah that are going to come out again and again and again. Okay? And as we do that, I believe you will appreciate Isaiah more than if you read it like a Gentile, like independently, as if it's not based on anything. The fact is, this prophet was raised to remind the people of what God had done for them as established in the Torah. And therefore, he's holding them accountable. In fact, in certain places he says, why go to the dead? Go to the testimonies. Go to the living. The testimonies are called testimonies because the 10 Commandments are called the 10 Commandments, but they're also called the testimonies. As 10 Commandments, they're to be obeyed. As the testimonies, they're to be believed. Because the 10 Commandments is something you're to believe in, not just obey. Because the 10 Commandments start with this: for I am the Lord your God who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Therefore, that's a faith issue. If you believe that, you're more likely to obey. In the book of Deuteronomy, he says this: when your son comes to you, says, Father, what are these 10 words? That's what they're actually called, 10 words, 10 sentences. So they're not all commands. Okay? What is that, Father? And you're to tell your son, son, the Lord our God by a mighty hand took us down into Egypt, and by a mighty hand he brought us up, and he destroyed Pharaoh. And you're going, the 10 Commandments actually is a testimony of God's salvation history, of bringing Israel up out of the land of Egypt. It is not just a moral code of how to behave. It is not that. It's a 10-word document that says, this symbolizes that we were slaves in Egypt, and God went down with a mighty hand, and he kept all his promises to Father Abraham. He secured 100% of his covenant with Father Abraham, and he brought us up by a mighty hand. And we honor these words because it is a symbol of our faith that we are the people who are saved by the right hand of God. And that's why we are called the children of the right hand, because we are the children that were brought up by the right hand of God. We didn't fight our way out of Egypt. God did it alone. Not based on our righteousness, but on his promises and covenant he made with Father Abraham. Okay? So as you read through Isaiah, one thing that'll be different with Isaiah that you have to add is and I'll go at this later, but you have to have a thorough understanding of the Davidic covenant, which is not that clear in Torah. It's there. For example, God promises in Genesis 49 that the future king that will be the dynasty will come from the line of Judah. For the scepter will not leave Judah. Chapter 49, 10. So the future kingship will come under Judah. And of course, David is from the tribe of Judah. King Saul wasn't. So as you go through Isaiah, well, I will give you some more information on the Davidic covenant, because the Davidic covenant is just as prominent as the Sinai covenant throughout the whole book. And the question is, in the book of Isaiah, is God going to fulfill his Davidic covenant? Because if God doesn't fulfill the Davidic covenant, it has implications on his ability to fulfill the original Sinai covenant. And so that has to be addressed. And what I need you guys to understand is, ultimately, all these things are going to be fulfilled in the person of Jesus. They're going to be fulfilled in the person of Jesus. Okay? Good. So, questions. What are we doing? We're going to go through Isaiah, and I'll be reaching back to these questions. Okay? There's no test. You don't have to worry. I got 7 of them. There isn't 12. There's probably closer to 30 questions to ask. But let's start with 10, 12, okay? We don't need to, But the point being is, we don't want to pull questions from the text that aren't there. We want to pull questions that are obviously were important to the original writer. It's like, clearly, God wants to be known as the one who created the heavens and the earth. So why are you making idols? He's got the power to do anything. So why did you hire the Assyrian army? Like, why did you do that? Do you believe that Yahweh is the God of heaven and earth? Or not? If he has the power to build heaven and earth, to create it, surely his arm isn't too short to save you. That's an argument Isaiah uses. So when you start realizing that their view of God on so many fundamental, the reason why they didn't cry out to God for salvation, they got most of these questions utterly wrong. You name the question. How about pain? We don't want pain. That's why we built idols, to avoid pain. Because we think that they'll save us from it. Well, Isaiah, you said that a good portion of us will die. We don't want to die. So we built more idols. You're like, yeah, okay, guys. If you don't stand in faith, you won't stand at all. Okay? Good. Do you want a 5-minute break? Let's take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to start with Isaiah. Okay? is give you some understanding of Isaiah, just the structure of it, okay? The structure of it's a very big book, as you can imagine. It's 66 chapters. Now, know this. The chapters are not inspired. Some of the chapter divisions are silly. They're really quite silly. They have nothing to do with really what the text is doing. Regardless. Chapter 1 is a prologue. What do I mean by that? It's a prologue in the sense of chapter 1 sets out basically the main point where he's going for the entire 66 chapters. So if you read every other chapter, you can go back to chapter 1 and go, yes, it has something to do with something in chapter 1. Chapter 1 is like a prologue. Okay? Chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 together is your introduction of your book. It lays out the problem that Israel is dumber than an ox, dumber than a donkey, and God has beaten it from head to foot, and he describes Israel as one single person. That's why he says, you have been bloodied from your head to your foot. That's like describing a man, one man. The whole nation is described as one man, bloodied from head to foot, and God says basically, it's done you no good. I have brought pain to you. I've brought sorrow. I've brought hatred into your life. But you know nothing. You're still as dumb as you're dumber than a cow. An ox knows where its food is, and a donkey knows where its manger is, or crib. But Israel, you don't know. It just says Israel does not know. Okay? That is the problem. As you move through the introduction, he threatens to bring something more horrific than anything in the past. And you're like, what is this? He doesn't tell you. But it's horrific. And they need to understand something horrific is coming. But you're not told. Other than the fact, it's a people group. He's going to keep his Abrahamic promises, his Mosaic promises, that I'll bring nations if you don't do what you're told. But he doesn't say what nation. He just says they're coming. And then you have the famous chapter 6. I saw the Lord high and lifted up. Okay? Holy, holy, holy. Okay? And you have God saying to Isaiah, who will go for me? Whom shall I send? Who will go for us? Whom shall I send? Here am I. And then God basically says, go unto a people that are always seeing, not perceiving, always hearing, not understanding. Meaning, I want you to do a ministry among people that are dumber than an ox, dumber than a donkey. And his answer is like, well, for how long? Until your country is in ashes. And the country is reduced to a stump. 90% will die. Because God decides who lives and who dies. And if you're dumber than an ox, dumber than a donkey, you're going to die. You're going to die. But know this, that stump will produce a shoot, a holy seed. It'll be 10%. And even of that, God will then work with that 10%. Okay? That is the call. Okay? Chapter 7 and 12 is where you have to spend most of your time if you're studying Isaiah. That is the book of Emmanuel. That is about Emmanuel. A promised child that will be born. And we'll talk about that at length. Okay? So that's the book of Emmanuel. You will see there's a song of praise at the end of the book of Emmanuel. There's two songs of praise at the book of the nations. This is the book of the nations, or section of the nations. There's also a beautiful prayer, a song here. He puts songs at the end of sections because that's the hope. For example, this one here, you probably know this song. Therefore the redeemed of the Lord shall return. Well, that's after God has basically yelled at them for being a bunch of fools. but promises them they will have a redemption in the future. And there will be a day that they will sing on the way back to Zion. I will bring them home. Then you have a historical section right in the center. This is the historical section. It's two sections. It's 36-37 and 38-39. The first one has to do the destruction of the Syrian army, 185,000 outside the walls of Jerusalem that God did in a single night. That's based on the prophecy of Emmanuel. This destruction, the destruction of the nations, is based on the prophecy of Emmanuel. This promise, there will be a seed, is because Emmanuel's coming. So Emmanuel is crucial to understanding the book. Emmanuel is crucial to understanding the book. Okay? A child born of a woman. This is Israel putting its confidence in Egypt, mainly Ethiopia, under the time of Hezekiah. It's a disaster. Absolute disaster. But they will be forgiven from it and find redemption in the future. So the historical element here, 36-37, where it says that God destroyed 185,000 soldiers in a single night, that is the prophecy of Emmanuel coming to fruition. So I'll have to explain that. But it's in this introduction prologue, because the prologue says this: the Jerusalem, Zion, unless the Lord had left survivors, she would be like Gomorrah. She would be likened to Sodom. No one would live. So when you read the prologue, God's talking about an event that happened in 701. 701. The promise of Emmanuel here is given in 735. 35 years earlier. The actual destruction of the army that he talks about in the prologue happens in chapters 36-37. That is 701. The key date is 701. It's not the destruction of Jerusalem. It is the destruction of the Assyrian army outside the walls of Jerusalem in a single night. That's what it's all about. Okay? Based on the prophecy of Emmanuel. Okay? Then Isaiah, after this period, this interlude, he goes into the second half of his work. It's not near as detailed on times and dates. It's much more poetic, because he's talking about the far future now. He's not talking about recent, but far future. And Isaiah now is going to skip over the destruction of Jerusalem in 586. And he's going to skip right over it. And he's going to take you to 536, when God promises to bring the children of Israel back from Babylon. But not by the Babylonians, by the Persians. Even names the king who will do it. His name is Cyrus, Koresh. Means shepherd in Persian. So what he does is he sees a future for Israel, but he doesn't give you all the details. So he's actually talking about an event that's 200 years roughly in the future. It's closer to 200 years in the future. It's 200 years in the future from Emmanuel. Because Emmanuel was prophesied in 735. Cyrus sends the people out in 536. That's virtually 200 years later. And he will name the king by name, because everything God does, he does through the prophetic word. Are you following me? It's a prophetic word. He's given his word. And if he says he's going to do it, like he's given his prophetic word, Jesus is coming back. Now, if you live a life that is not so, you're not just careless, you're not respecting the prophetic word. And that makes God charge you with, you treat me like a liar, or impotent, that when I say something, that I won't make it happen. It won't go well with you if you don't hear my word and you ignore it. They ignore the prophecy of Emmanuel, and they don't believe in it. So when God finally destroys the Syrian army, it's when Israel doesn't believe in Emmanuel, in the prophecies. They don't believe it at all. Now, chapter 40 acts like a major heading for the second half, if you want to call it a second half. Okay? And it's in 3 sections, 40 to 48. Take a look at chapter 48. Look at the last verse. What does it say? 48:22. What does it say?
There is no peace, says the Lord, for the wicked.
There you go. That's 1/3 of the second half. Turn with me to 57:21.
There is no peace, says my God, for the wicked.
And another word for peace implies no rest, just a tossing, torment, tossing. No peace, no soundness. Okay, let's look at chapter 66. How does it end? 24.
They shall go forth and look upon the corpses of men who have transgressed against me, for their worm does not die, and their fire is not quenched. They shall be an abhorrence to all flesh.
Clearly that implies there shall be no peace for the... Oh, absolutely. That's how he divides the second half of Isaiah. There is no peace for the wicked. There's no rest for the wicked. You will be tormented day and night. Now, Cain. He was told to rule over sin, correct? But sin ruled over him, correct? And then God came and gave him his punishment. But before he got punished, the land testified to the blood of Abel. And God said, the land, the earth, will not give its strength to you. And he says, you will be a wanderer. What's a wanderer? Someone who has no, because there's no peace for the... Everywhere I'll go, they'll want to kill me, God. What land did he go to? He went to the land of, what's it called? He went far to the east. What's it called? It's the land of Nod. Remember that? That's the Hebrew word for wandering. Because there's no rest for the wicked. He was told, do not let sin rule over you. But it did rule over him. And so Cain becomes a picture of, this will happen to you, Israel. If you do what's wicked, there'll be no rest for the wicked. Know this. Therefore the redeemed of the Lord shall come. But that's not the wicked. That's those who put their faith in God. Are you following me? Not the ones who deny God and hate their brothers, but those who are contrite in heart and hear God's word and plead for mercy. God will not call such people wicked. Okay? And he grants them peace. Perfect peace. So, the second half is based on the concept of there is no rest for, or no peace for the wicked. But if you take the center of the second half, okay, let me take you to the very center passage of the second half. Are you following me? So from 40 to 66, there's 3 sections. Let's go to the center of the center section. Okay? Where is it? It's 52:13 to 53:12. That's the center. That's right in the center of it. What is 52:13 to 52:12? It is the suffering servant. Salvation comes through pain. Salvation comes through deception, oppression, Salvation comes through hatred. Salvation comes through the woman, through the weaker vessel. Salvation comes through someone not who shows up strong, but weak, and is marred beyond human recognition. Israel, you're dumber than an ox, you're beaten, and you don't know. This person is beaten because he knows the will of the Lord. Because this person agrees that God decides what is good, what is very good, and what is not good. And to avoid the cross for him would not be good. And God decides who lives and who dies. And God does not want to save mankind through man's strength, but through weakness. And God saves mankind through hatred, the hatred that Jesus receives from his own people without cause. Are you following me? It's the centerpiece of the second half of Isaiah. And it's got 5 sections. And conveniently, all in 3 verses. So the last 3 verses of chapter 52 is your first section. That goes with the last 3 verses of chapter 53. They belong together. Then move it up 3. The first 3 verses of chapter 53 go with the 3 that are beside the last 3 of chapter 53. And the centerpiece is chapter 53, 4, 5, and 6. Jack, read that. Isaiah 53, 4, 5, and 6. That's the centerpiece of the centerpiece of the centerpiece of the second half of the book of Isaiah. And every major theme you'd ask of God, most of them are answered right in this section. All the things that are important to God. Go ahead, Jack.
Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray, we have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all.
So even this section has 3 sections. And the center one is verse 5. Violent shedding of blood, substitution. And by his stripes we are healed. There is no peace for the wicked, but by his stripes that he received, the wicked are justified if they believe in him. The centerpiece of the centerpiece of the centerpiece of the centerpiece reminds you of what caused the divisions in the second half. And it takes you right back to what God said to the serpent. I will put hatred between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And boy, will the serpent hate Jesus. Oh, will he hate Jesus. Jesus will not conquer the devil through his physical strength, but through weakness. Through weakness. Let me put it another way. You can frame it this way. God wants to know from every Hebrew, where do you put your confidence? Is it in spirit or in flesh? Because the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. So where do you put your confidence? Do you put confidence in the flesh? Because if you're going to put confidence in the flesh, you should get a young man, strong. But I'm saving people again and again through women. And old men. Through Pharaoh's daughter. Through Moses' sister. Through Moses' mama. Through Pharaoh's daughter's servant girls. Through Israel's midwives. Are you following me? How is it there was not one strong man in any of that? And then finally, when I asked the men to fight, a bunch of cowards. They would not fight the giants. No, you should not put confidence in the flesh, Israel. You put your confidence in the Syrian army. I killed 185,000 in a single night. Flesh is nothing compared to spirit. But you should know that. Because that's what I did in the Red Sea, didn't I? And Isaiah will talk about the Red Sea a lot. How did that army in the Red Sea, how did they do? And how many of your men, strong men, helped me? No. I'll tell you what. A woman is going to have a child. Count on the Assyrian army will be destroyed because of it. Now you can choose. You can hire the army, or you can believe in the prophecy of the child. Because this is what God does. It's another question you have to ask yourself. It comes from the Torah, again. Noah, build a boat. God, it's never rained like that, ever. Ever. Build a boat. How big? God, that's really big. That take years to build. Build a boat. God, you can't do that in your backyard. Everyone's going to know I'm building a boat. Are you willing to follow God that doesn't care about your reputation? He just doesn't care. That is not important to him. He cares you're righteous, but he doesn't care if people believe it. It's not his first goal to make sure everyone believes that you're true blue. I mean, even Jesus, his family thought he was insane. Came to do a family intervention and bring him home. If you're the Son of God and people think you're insane, and God is allowing his own family to think that way, why would you assume his first priority would be that you would not look bad? And the king is being challenged. Put away your agreement with this 400,000 man chariot army and believe the prophecy. A young girl is going to give birth to a child. And God knows, Ahaz, it's not in him to do it. There's no way he's going to do it. So God separates those who trust in God, that God can do anything. He is the God of the heaven and the earth. Are you following me? He can do anything. He has all power. And Ahaz doesn't believe that. He sticks with his army. And that army will cause him huge grief. Are you with me? So the question, fundamental question is, do you put your confidence in God's salvation, even though he brings salvation in often awkward and uncomfortable ways, and in ways that you don't get much credit? Or do you put confidence in your flesh? The centerpiece tells you that when Emmanuel comes, God will use him to bring salvation in the world, but not based on his strength, but on his willingness to be weak for a moment until God says, now be strong. And unbelievable. That's what Israel needed, but they don't see it. He is the exact example of what God had hoped from his people, to not put confidence in the flesh. And it wasn't with them. Okay? So that is your basic approach. You have a prologue. Now, here's one of the things that's a kicker. This drives students at Miller crazy. It's not in a chronological order. So, when he talks about, okay, the people reading Isaiah, the scroll, for the first time, okay, there's much in here that's talked about they'll never see. The people who read the original scrolls. Because it's 200 years in the future. Now, are you following me? But anyone who reads the scroll knows that God has wiped out the Assyrian army in a single night. The nations know it. Israel knows it. Everybody knows it. And so anyone picking up this scroll of Isaiah and reading it knows that unbelievable event. And this book is trying to make headwater what happened. What happened here? Our nation lost 90% of the people, but then in the end, God just burns them out outside the walls of Jerusalem in a single night. Would someone please explain this to me? What happened? And it'll go all the way, and you have all of this to explain that salvation experience. But what God does is he doesn't just give you that, but he gives you a future picture of the cross, of the ascension, of the second coming, because the second coming will also be at Jerusalem, and it will also be destruction of the nations, and it will be done in a single night, just like 701, and also based on the prophecy of Emmanuel. In fact, it will be Emmanuel himself that does it. It's not an event that just is predicted by Emmanuel. It's an event Emmanuel actually carries out himself. Make sense? Are you with me, guys? So as you go through, he talks about 701 has already happened. Because he says, unless the Lord had left us a remnant, we would have been like Sodom. We would have been likened to Gomorrah. What he's saying is, if it wasn't for the fact that God sent an angel of death and wiped out that army in a single night, we had no way. We're goners. They were going to breach our walls, and there would be no Jews left. Because virtually all of the Hebrew people that were left in the land were huddled in Jerusalem, because they had taken over all the other cities, including the fortress cities like Lachish. They're all gone. And so you've got Jerusalem's just packed with refugees. Just packed to the gills. They got no water, because when the Assyrian army shows up, they're sitting at the washerman pool just outside the walls. That's where the spring is. So now you have, if you want to drink, because there's no Hezekiah tunnels at this time, you have to go fight them and push them away. Well, how are you going to do that? You got no soldiers. You're done. They don't have to breach the wall. They can just sit on the water until you die of thirst. And they got mocked. They said, if you have 2,000 soldiers, we'll give you horses to put them on. I mean, I'm sure you'd like to run away now. And God destroys them in a single night. That is predicted. Okay? So, yeah. Now, if you take a look at this prologue early, let's go to Genesis. Okay? It's not Genesis, it's Isaiah. Okay? Let's take a look at it. Now, the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amos, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Okay? Uzziah was the last great king of power, but then he was an idiot. He's also known as Azariah. And he acted like a high priest, and God gave him leprosy. So though he's alive, he cannot rule the nation. He is, with leprosy, disqualified. He's unclean. He cannot lead the troops in battle. He cannot sit on the throne of Israel. He is in hiding. So his son Jotham is reigning on behalf of his father during this time. And Ahaz, his grandson, is very corrupt. Okay? And then, during this time, you also have eventually Hezekiah is brought onto the scene. Okay? And that is Uzziah's great-grandson. And he's a good king. But both Ahaz and Hezekiah make a fundamental mistake. Ahaz depends on the Assyrians for his strength, and Hezekiah will depend on Egypt. And both will cause hundreds of thousands of Jews to die. Ahaz never changes his ways and doesn't learn from it, and there's no mercy. But Hezekiah recognizes what he's done is wrong, and God shows him pity and destroys the army in his time outside the walls of Jerusalem. But not because all his choices were good, but it's more because the Assyrians were so wicked rather than the king was so good. But he was far better than Ahaz, and we'll look at that as we go on. Then you have this phrase, "Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord has spoken." Now this phrase, give ear, O heavens, hear, O earth, is the saying that's in the book of Deuteronomy when God told Moses, teach this song to the Hebrew people. It was a prediction of the future when the nation would rebel against God. Isaiah says, we're now in that day. Moses predicted in the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy that Israel would walk away from God and be punished by the nations. Isaiah is saying, it's this day. God said that they would become Sodom and Gomorrah. They'd be as evil as Sodom and Gomorrah. And if you go through the language of the song of in Deuteronomy that Moses speaks of in chapter 32, that he teaches Israel, you will see all those sins show up in Isaiah. And much of the same language. God says they will become corrupt children. He calls them corrupt children. He says, you will become sinful. You will worship demons. You will build idols. You will be Sodom. You will be Gomorrah. And you'll be besieged. And you will swell in the face from besiegement. No food, no... And he describes everything that Isaiah is going to see. From his point of view, Isaiah sees, because you have to understand, the northern tribes and southern tribes still exist. They're independent. But by the time Isaiah's done his ministry, the northern tribes are gone. And the southern tribes are holding on with a whisper. Just a remnant left in Jerusalem. And it was only God's grace that Jerusalem was allowed to survive based on the promise of Emmanuel. And so what you have here is Isaiah sees that he is in the day when Moses said the nation is going to be absolutely handed over to the nations. The time of the Gentiles is coming. The time of Israel. You see, when you're in the time of the Gentiles, you name years by Gentile kings because you have no Davidic king. And it's not going to be long after this period of time that they're going to lose a Davidic throne. This book is about, will the Davidic throne be lost forever? And the promise of Emmanuel says, no. For a child is born. A child is born. A son is given. And he'll be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Prince of Peace, Everlasting Father. No, there's a child coming. There will be a remnant of people and a child coming who will sit on this throne. The Davidic line will not be like Saul's that was wiped out. But Israel is moving into a time that Moses foresaw. And most of it is fulfilled in the time of Isaiah. Then Isaiah speaks of a time when they'll come back from exile. That proves that they must have gone to a place where they lost everything. Because he doesn't even talk about destruction of Jerusalem, really. He just says he'll bring them back from the four corners of the earth because of the promise to Emmanuel. Okay? So if you take a look, let's go back to Deuteronomy very quickly. Okay? Chapter 31, verse 30. Then Moses spoke the words of this song until they were finished in the ears of all the assembly of Israel. Chapter 32, verse 1. Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, and let the earth hear the words of my mouth. May my teaching drop as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, like gentle rain upon the tender grass, and like showers upon the herb. For I will proclaim the name of the Lord, ascribe the greatness to our God, the rock. His work is perfect, for all his ways are justice, or sound judgment. A God of faithfulness and without iniquity, just and upright is he. They have dealt corruptly with him. They are no longer his children, because they are blemished. They are crooked and twisted generation. Do you thus repay the Lord, you foolish and senseless people? Is he not your Father who created you, who made you and established you? If you just go through these are the basic questions of Israel. Is he not your Father? Does he not expect you to obey him? Does he not have the power of you living or dying? Do you not believe he has the knowledge of what is good and very good and not good? Why are you doing this? You're getting everything wrong. Let me tell you. And then he goes on, he says, remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you, your elders, and they will tell you. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. In chapter 10 of Genesis, 17 nations are listed. One for each son of Jacob that went down into Egypt. Because Israel is the priestly nation to represent all of the nations. 70 for 70. He lists them. But the Lord bearing them on its pinions. What he's saying is, I picked you up, put you on my wings if I was a bird. I picked you up, put you on my shoulders if I was a father. You didn't walk through that desert. I carried you. I brought you up out of the land. Put proper credit. But now you're trusting all these gods to look after you. Ask your forefathers, who did these things? And then he goes on, and notice he'll play with things like curds from the herd and milk from the flock. That's going to be punned later in the story of Emmanuel. But Jeshurun, that means upright one, he grew fat and he kicked. You grew fat, stout, and sleek. Then he forsook God who made him and scoffed at the rock of his salvation. They stirred him up to jealousy with strange gods, with abominations that provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons that were no gods, to gods that they had never known, to new gods that they had recently encountered, whom your fathers had never dreaded. You were unmindful of the rock that bore you, and you forgot the God who gave you birth. The Lord saw it, and he spurned them because of the provocation of the sons and his daughters. And he said, I will hide my face from them. Isaiah says this, the God of Jacob has hidden his face from you, Israel, because of your sins. Everything that's important to me, you've just threw my face. You're looking for salvation, but in all the wrong places. Okay? And then he goes on, if you keep reading, for example, 32. For their vine comes from the vine of Sodom and from the fields of Gomorrah. And if you go through this song, pretty well everything that Moses predicts, Isaiah talks about. But then God says, you are Sodom and you are Gomorrah, but you will not have their fate for the sake of Abraham. For if the Lord had not left you survivors, you would have become like Sodom and Gomorrah, no survivors. But I waited until you knew you're as good as dead, O daughter of Zion. If you call yourself a daughter of Zion, what does that make you? A woman. And the woman is as good as dead. And when the woman believes she's as good as dead, she's got no hope, God shows up. Boom. And fulfills his prophecy of Emmanuel. Kills 185,000 soldiers in a single night. As a testimony to their unbelief. I looked and I found none to believe. I kept my word. I promised it. So whether you believe it or not, I keep my word. But I'll remember that you didn't believe it. And I'll set a day. Next time, I'm not going to rescue you. And he didn't. He brought Nebuchadnezzar and destroyed it and told Jeremiah, don't you sin and pray for them. This city's going down. If you ask me to save it, I have made myself clear. You can pray for the people, individuals to come to knowledge of me, but do not pray for protection of Jerusalem. I have decreed it. I decide who lives and who dies. And these people don't believe in me. They don't love me. They don't obey me. They don't respect me. They don't fear me. Let them die. And the ones who feared me, they went into exile. And I will protect them in a foreign land. But for those who stay and fight, let them die. Let them put their confidence in their flesh. And let them die. And that's how God separates the sheep and the goats. The ones who put no confidence in their flesh, they do what Jeremiah says, they pack up and they go into exile. And God says, I'll bring you back in 70 years. Go. The ones who don't believe, they say, this is not a good idea. That is not very good. In fact, it's not good. So we're going to stay. And God says, yeah, you're the guys who die. The ones you think will die, if you try and save your life, you're going to. But if you're willing to lose your life, you'll save it. It's all about understand who God is. So it's very important to understand. Isaiah sees that he is in the time of fulfillment. Are you with me? He sees that the nation is at a crossroads where God is starting to implement the threats that God gave Moses for the children of Israel to memorize, to give to their children. Why did Moses predict their demise in the future? So that when it came, they know, this did not surprise me. I knew you would walk away, but I will not tell you when. But now I have given you the prophet Isaiah, and he is telling you when. It's now. It is now. And has Israel ever had 90% of its people killed? No. No. But it's going to happen now. Because you have entered into the judgments that Moses predicted. You rejected the covenant. You have rejected Moses. And God is not mocked. What you sow, you will reap. Israel, you have become Sodom. You have become Gomorrah. And if it wasn't for God's grace, you'd get the same fate. But you won't. Because of the promise of Emmanuel. Well, questions? How are we doing? Now, so that's one thing you want to do. Now, if you want more details, you can buy my book. It's a new edition. It's a rework. And for $20, it's way more than I'll have time to teach in 6 hours. It's what I teach at the college. It's $20. It's well worth it. Here's the second thing I want you to recognize, going back to the prologue, Isaiah chapter 1. Isaiah chapter, come on, Aaron. Let's look at several issues. One, if you go through the story of Moses, for example, you've got the word rebel. You've got the concept of knowing and not knowing, not understanding. You've got a concept of sinful. You've got the concept of evildoers, corrupt children. You've got the concept of forsaking the Lord. It's just all there. Another thing I want you to take note is Israel's described as one man beaten from head to foot. Look at verse 4. Ah, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity. So we're clearly talking about the nation. Offspring of evildoers, children who deal corruptly. They have forsaken the Lord. They have despised the Holy One of Israel. They are utterly estranged. That clearly speaks of the nation as a massive amount of people. But then he goes on to say this. Why will you be struck down? Why will you continue to rebel? The whole head is sick, the whole heart faint. From the sole of the foot even to the head, there is no soundness in it, but bruises and sores and wounds, raw wounds. They are not pressed out or bound up or softened with oil. Verse 5 and 6 describes Israel as one single person who's bloodied from head to foot, and it does no good. This is your backdrop to understanding Isaiah 53. The same language is used. Someone is bloodied from head to foot. One person is bloodied from head to foot, and by his wounds we are healed. And through his knowledge, he makes intercession for the many. His blows have nothing to do with him not knowing. And he is wounded on every aspect of him. His beard's pulled out, his back's ripped up. He is simply torn up. That's the point. He's described just like this passage here. And God says, Israel, you look like this because you're utterly corrupt. You look like a bloody mess. You are bloody from the head to the foot because you are corrupt. You have wounds and they're festering and they're not healed. You are so broken because you have no understanding that I'm hard-pressed to find where I would hit you now. You're beyond discipline. Every time I discipline and bring some pain to you, you just go and make more gods. You worship more demons. You talk more to the dead and necromancies. You persecute my prophets more, and you kill the prophets. You blame them for your woes because they predicted it, as if they caused it. No, they're just a mouthpiece, Israel. This is how I will pay for your corruption. I will corrupt my son. The word he was marred beyond human likeness is the same Hebrew word for corrupt. He will be corrupted physically. Marred beyond human likeness is the Hebrew. All the language that is in chapter 1 is in chapter 53. Here you rebelled. Here he made intercession for the rebels. It says transgressors, same Hebrew word. Everything here. Here, you suffer because you were sinful. I make him a sin. I make him sin. What that means is I make him a sin offering. The word offering has to be added so you get the point. I treat him like sin. You actually were sinful, but he looks just like you. He looks just like, I described you in such a way that if I were to describe the nation, most of the people are dead, the cities are in ashes, the little ones they're cowering in the crevices of the rocks and caves. Some of you are hanging on to your false idols in your caves, throwing them away, realizing they're useless. I mean, if I were to describe my people as a single person, I would say they are bloodied from head to foot, and there's nowhere else to hit them, hoping that they would change, because Israel does not know. Israel does not know. But this one knows the will of the Lord. He looks like you, but he's so different. That's identification. Are you following me, guys? That's how you make substitution. You don't make substitution by finding a fireman and sending a fireman. You make substitution by having someone look guilty. Because God describes a nation in these terms because they are utterly foolish and guilty, and then does it to his own son. And you wonder why people think God must think he's foolish, and he saved others, but he can't save himself. They wag their heads at him until his light died, because God actually made him look like he was guilty, because that is part of the atonement. Because atonement comes through pain, suffering, hatred. And he was hated to his last breath, so that we could have salvation. And so some of the scholars say, well, I think there's two Isaiahs. Believe me, the first half and the second half are really, really, really tight. They're super tight. The prologue, it's the climax of the prologue is in the center of the second half, which is the suffering servant. Unlike Israel, who suffered for no good. But this servant suffers to bring salvation to Israel. And not just Israel, but to the entire world. Now, there's another truth, though, that we need to understand, and I'll explain it more. If God can liken the whole nation to a single man, are you with me? He can also liken the faithful remnant of Israel to a single man. And the ultimate Jeshurun is the Messiah himself. Let me say it again. If God can liken the entire nation to one person, bloodied from head to foot, who does not know, God can liken the faithful remnant within Israel, which the Bible calls the disciples of Isaiah, the ones who follow his word. God can liken them as a single man, and they are bloodied from head to foot, but for righteousness' sake. And God talks about his faithful remnant. And Isaiah was included. Isaiah lost his life to Israel, and many of the faithful remnant. Let me say it again. If God can liken the entire nation to a single man, and he likens the Messiah, obviously, to a single man, do not be surprised. God can liken the faithful remnant as a single man. That's why, in places in the New Testament, There's a concept that the Messiah is led like a lamb to slaughter. But in the New Testament, it also quotes passages that we are like lambs led to slaughter because we are the faithful remnant. We're the ones who will be saved because we're willing to take the hatred that is uncalled for. We're willing to pick up our cross. We're willing to be perceived as evil by ignorant people as they were with Jesus. And so what is true of the head must bleed, but so must the body, the church. And faithful Israel did bleed with Isaiah. They were not all unfaithful. And so when you talk about Isaiah, he's talking about three things. Sometimes he talks about Israel, the whole nation. Sometimes he's talking about faithful Israel, which is that faithful remnant. He called it the holy seed. 10% would be a holy seed. People that aren't dumber than an ox, dumber than a donkey. How would you know? Because he talks about the end of the book. Because the average Jew hated them. And they persecuted them. It was the Jews persecuted the faithful remnant, just as they did in Jeremiah's day. Who's the ultimate faithful one? It is the Messiah himself. So when you think of the suffering servant passage, you need to be thinking in terms of the contrast between those who are willing to obey God and suffer horrendous discouragement from the others. And because they were willing to suffer, God took their righteousness of suffering and accredited it to the nation's good. We have this teaching. The church is built on the blood of the, help me out. The church is built on the blood of the martyrs. That's a fact. A lot of times, 2 and 3 generations later, your blessed has nothing to do with your righteousness. It was the faithfulness of the blood of the previous martyrs. Because God honors faith. And he can push it forward many years. But the ultimate expression of this is in the person of Jesus himself. Because he's not just blameless, he is what? Sinless. So the righteous blood of Abel has power. But the blood of the wicked has no power. None. If you pick up your cross and you suffer for the kingdom and you lose your life, unbeknownst to you, you might be the source of blessing for your children and grandchildren because God remembers your kindness to the kingdom and your dedication. And he blesses your children and grandchildren. He's promised that. They said, don't hate me. Because if you hate me, your hate will die with you. And I'll undo everything that you built up. And you won't be around for me to stop it. But if you love me, so if you hate me, I'll spend the next 400 years undoing you. And everything you think is important. But if you love me for 1,000 generations, I'll bless. Are you following me, guys? That's a very biblical. Now you have to be careful. You have to be careful. Clearly, we are saved through our faith in Jesus Christ, correct? But the Bible's very clear that when a person is righteous, it benefits his posterity and others. That's why he would say, the boys, are they saved because of their righteousness or the righteousness of Joseph? Is it their faithfulness or is it Joseph's faithfulness? It's Joseph's. Through one man's obedience, God has blessed this many. Now, whose idea was the whole thing? It's God's. God gets the glory. But we need to be careful because in our desire to give all the glory to God, you can strip the fact that you have the power to bless through faithfulness. And you have the power to curse through unfaithfulness. Because God decides who he blesses and who he curses. At the Red Sea, when Israel disobeyed and they weren't going to trust God It was because of his love of his friend that he remembered the righteousness of Abraham. And he makes it very clear, it was for the sake of Abraham that I did not have you die there in your unbelief. I found no faith there that day. But for the sake of my friend Abraham, you live. Everyone lived because of the friendship God had with Abraham. Because that was a man who says, God said, now I know you fear God. Meaning, I can trust you. You can trust me. Because when you're dead and you can't protect your people, you can't pray for your people, you won't be there. I'll be there for your people. You can trust me. Because you trusted me. You can trust me. I'll be there. But he's not there because the people are faithful. That he kept his promise to is, a lot of people get saved not because the parents were awesome. Grandma was awesome. Grandpa was awesome. They were just so faithful to God. God just, as he said, he will do this. I believe to understand the suffering servant, you have to go first. Israel as a whole is faithless. But God promised that through the prophecy of Emmanuel, there would be a holy seed. It would be truly holy. Not just one person, but a beautiful branch. It would be the faithful remnant. That would not be like the nation which hates God and despises God, but a nation that is truly holy. Under the leadership and following of Emmanuel. Emmanuel is the cornerstone. There's no question, and it is his blood that brings us salvation. But the idea that God does not make a difference between a faithful life and an unfaithful life, there's just no biblical basis for that. None. Absolutely none. The boys experienced the Abrahamic blessings because Joseph said no to Potiphar's wife. Are you following me? And he said no to Satan when it's my chance to kill them. Because he knew that was not God's plan. You intended it for evil. You were quite hateful and deceitful. You were like the serpent. You were a murderer and a liar since I was 17 years old. At least from then. That's when. But no, but I'm not God. Through one man's disobedience, Adam, sin came to the world, and by sin, death. And through one man's obedience, Joseph, one man obeyed, and so many were saved. Make sense, guys? But Joseph is not the ultimate expression of that. It is Jesus, correct? But you have to understand that before you get to Jesus, you've got to understand how we get there. So we're looking for one person. You know what I'm saying? We're looking for one person. But that one person isn't alone. Because that one person will come with a remnant. And you and I are part of that holy remnant. We are the true eschatological Israel. Because Israel was the people that were told, don't put confidence in the flesh. We don't. We're not supposed to defend ourselves with guns and swords and weapons, but through prayer and fasting and faith. We don't defend ourselves by our strength, but when we're weak, then we're strong. We are the faithful remnant. But if we're treated badly, it's not because we don't know the Lord's will, it's because we actually know it. Like Jesus, because we are the faithful remnant. So I would understand that the faithful servant that God's talking about, A, is clearly one person that will be on the Davidic throne, but it also includes the faithful remnant that follows him. Because if Jesus is asked to bleed, Paul says it this way, and I am filling up in my flesh what is still lacking of the afflictions of Christ. And people go, what do you mean Christ's afflictions lack? What he says is this, I am filling up in my flesh what is still lacking of the afflictions of Christ. Meaning, God never intended only for Jesus to bleed the head, but also the body. Because salvation comes through hatred, it comes through weakness, it comes through pain, and that's not just through Jesus, that's also through us. You take the pain, you take the hatred, you show forgiveness, and people get saved. Make sense? And no one gets the glory except God. Because you got saved by hating and being ignorant. if you weren't raised in maybe a good home. Okay? So, backing up. I'll leave this on the board, but it's so important to understand. Don't do what the scholars do. They have one Isaiah that takes you to about here, and another one that takes you here, or even 2 or 3 over here. The fact is, the book of Isaiah really is all about Emmanuel. Now tomorrow I'm going to give you a hint, and I'll tell you where I'm going. We have to learn the meanings of the 12 tribes of Israel. What they mean and how they are prophecy all came from women. Women predicted their names, and the names predicted that God would bring them out of Egypt and out of the great tribulation in the future. Both Hosea and Isaiah, they're contemporaries. Hosea and Isaiah. It's the naming of their children that's going to give you what's going to happen in Isaiah's day. Jezreel, Lo Ruhama, Lo Ami, Shear Yeshuv, Emmanuel, Mahershal Hashbaz, Hoshea, and Yehoshua. Yehoshua is Isaiah, and Hoshea is Hosea. You put all these names together, and you have the full description of the book of Isaiah and Hosea, and how God is going to keep his promise through Emmanuel. Salvation is going to come through the prophecy of the women and giving birth to a child, and it's the child's name that tells you everything. Talk about salvation not through the strength of men, but just the naming of a child. And even Jesus is that way. When he's born, and you shall call his name Yehoshua, Yahweh saves. Because everything about Jesus, all you need to know is, what does his name mean? He is Yahweh. There is only one Yahweh, and there's only one Savior. Yahweh. That child is Yahweh. And he will save his people from their sins. Are you following me, guys? And the rest of the Gospels simply explain what is this? But we need to know these names. Why do you need to know the names of Hosea and Isaiah? Because this is the way God saves. He saves through the prophetic word. And all the names of the children of Israel, they were named, except one, they're all named by women. So that no man can boast. And they're all born of women. And the child itself has no power. But it's the meaning of the name that brings all of the prophetic word. The child itself has no power. So when you see that little guy, Hosea's kid, he's like, hey, little girl, what's your name? Lo Ruhama. No mercy. Why are you named Lo Ruhama? Because God's going to not show no mercy. He's going to bring the Assyrians, and he's going to turn his face away from us. But one day when we turn to him, he's going to call me Rohama, mercy. Beautiful. The child itself has no power, but the name itself has all the power because God said it. Are you following me? Count on it. That's why he says, don't look to the dead, look to the living. There's all kinds of children that symbolize what I'm going to do. Figure out their names, figure what it means, and you should know. Just as I did in Egypt. I used the names of Israel, and I'm going to now use the prophets' names. Not only their children's names, but their own names. And then you'll know that salvation comes from the Lord. That's what Isaiah means. Salvation comes from the Lord. Okay, I'm done for tonight. And we'll continue. We will do as much as we can. We'll do lots. But we have to get a foundation. You can't write so fast. You should buy a book. Because for you who got carpal tunnel